Do you ever feel like you have to act a certain way, look a certain way, be a certain person? A chill person, the kind who doesn't let anything bother them, who takes everything that's thrown at them, no matter how bad, and meets it all with a calm, collected smile, putting on a show that everything is fine, even when this is far from the case. Well, if this in any way describes you, then you'll have something in common with the characters of a little story called Everything is Fine, a webcomic created by Mike Birchall and H.B. Klein that follows the residents of a cute suburban town. A town which on the surface seems like a paradise. I mean, just look at the place. All of the homes are lovely, all of the neighbours are friendly, but perhaps best of all, everyone is always smiling. You won't find a frown in this town. In fact, it's downright impossible, because every single character in this story is wearing a mask. And not just some of the time, we're talking 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When they sleep, when they bathe, when they do a smelly toilet, all of it is spent wearing a mask. This mask resembles a cute cartoon cat, similar to Hello Kitty, with dots for eyes and, you guessed it, a smile. It's extremely basic, but the goal of this mask is to ensure that no matter how the residents are feeling on the inside, no matter how angry or upset or scared they may be, they will always have that same calm, content expression. It'll appear as though everything is fine, even when it's not. Because, as we soon find out, there's a big difference between looking perfect and actually being perfect. And not everything about this town is as good as it seems. Paradise comes at a cost, and there's some things you'll have to give up if you plan on living here. The first being your individuality. You see, there's only one accepted way of doing things here, and so the residents don't just have to wear the same mask, they're all expected to wear the same kind of formal traditional clothing. Say a suit, a sweater, a summer dress. They all live in identical houses on identical roads in identical neighbourhoods. And because they're all identical, they don't even bother naming them. Or more likely, they're not allowed. Instead, these neighbourhoods have a number assigned to them. 13B, 16C, because in the world of Everything is Fine, it's dangerous to stand out. After all, this place is perfect. What could anyone possibly want to change? If you think that you can do things better, then you must be ungrateful. And maybe you don't deserve to live here in paradise. But this control isn't just found in where they live and what they wear, it's found in the way they speak. Which brings us to the second thing you have to give up. Your speech. The residents are expected to act a certain way, at all times, a way that reflects the calm expression seen on their masks. No outbursts, no complaining, just fine. There are many times throughout the story where characters will be talking with one another, and as occasionally happens in conversation, they'll begin to disagree, to the point where it looks like things might escalate into an argument, but it never does. Instead, they'll just stare at each other silently with these fixed expressions for a moment. And even though we can't see what's under their masks, you just know that they're seething, wanting to speak their mind, but forced to bite their tongue, scared to say anything that will escalate the situation because they're so terrified of coming across as even slightly upset. After all, this place is perfect. The people are perfect. What could anyone possibly have to be upset about? If you're not happy while living in a place this wonderful, well, then you must be ungrateful. And maybe you don't deserve to live here in paradise. And so everyone plays along, gritting their teeth through every conversation, pretending that this place is perfect and that everyone around them is perfect, but all the while looking over their shoulders, because in these suburbs you never know who's watching. The ones in charge of this place are called the State, which from everything we learn about them is probably short for surveillance state, as there is not a single moment where you aren't being tracked in some way. Be it by the countless cameras which line every street and store, the chips implanted into the masks themselves, or even by your own neighbours. In fact, it seems that part of the reason that they are so friendly is it gives them an excuse to get close to you so they can observe everything you're doing. Maybe they catch you acting in a way that the state would disapprove of, having an argument, or God forbid, letting out a cheeky swear. Frick. Well, this is all valuable information that can be traded with the state, because here in Everything is Fine, the only way to move up the social ladder is by proving how loyal you are. So, as you can see, this place is perfect only in appearance, and the second you scratch even slightly below the surface, the dark truth begins to reveal itself. And keeping up a fake appearance like this, even inside of your own home, would be exhausting, as we quickly see from our lead characters, a married couple named Maggie and Sam. Just like everyone else who calls these suburbs home, it seems like everything is fine for Maggie and Sam. Actually, more than fine, they seem to be doing great. One of the first things out of Sam's mouth is how much he loves Maggie, gushing over how much he doesn't deserve her. But from Maggie's response, it's clear that she doesn't really feel the same way, because she doesn't reply with "I love you too," instead just telling him how sweet he is. And that's one of my favourite things about this comic. They really nail all the subtle ways that people express they're unhappy without outright just saying it. And this is especially evident when it comes to the residents insulting each other. Rather than saying what they're really thinking, they disguise their insults as compliments. There's a moment early on where our lead, Maggie, is wearing a dress that's a bit more revealing than the more traditional clothes that the residents usually wear. And one of the other residents tells her, "I wish I didn't care what I showed off." At first glance, this appears like a nice comment. This woman is admiring her, telling her that she's courageous even. But there's judgment here. She's saying the only reason Maggie is wearing this outfit isn't because she thinks it looks nice, but because she's attention seeking. It's almost like saying, "Oh, other people are going to judge you for this, I won't, but others will." It's someone who's figured out a socially acceptable way of insulting, doing it in plain view in front of everyone with a smile on their face, but disguising it as a compliment so that if anyone checks them on it, they can just plead ignorance. I mean, they were just trying to be nice, and it's not their fault if someone takes it the wrong way. So even with this extreme level of control and surveillance to make sure the residents act as expected, they still manage to find ways around these restrictions and speak their mind. And this dress comment is just one example. Everything is Fine is filled with this sort of dialogue. Dialogue that also feels as though it's wearing a mask. The opening issue sees Maggie and Sam getting ready one morning, and as the pair are having breakfast, they get into a slight disagreement when Sam says that he's being treated poorly at work, something which Maggie takes an issue with. But Sam defends himself by saying that he's only playing the long game now so that down the line he can get a promotion. However, Maggie is unhappy with this mindset, clapping back with, "Is playing the game really the best way? You can play roulette as much as you want, but in the end, who owns the casino?" Of course, what she's really saying here is that Sam's fighting a losing battle, and maybe doing what's expected of him in every aspect, just in the slim chance of a reward, isn't the best way to get what you want. And of course, by saying this, Maggie is massively challenging authority, which in a place where everyone is so closely monitored and controlled, expected to be compliant at all times is a very dangerous thing. So she has to dress it up, disguise it within a metaphor about casinos and roulette. But from this statement, it's clear that Maggie is beginning to question her role within this society. She's tired of constantly having to put up a front, and it's not long until we see the first major crack in this perfect image. When, after Sam has left, Maggie goes to feed their dog, Winston. However, something feels off. Winston is nowhere to be found, and not only this, when she empties his food bowl from the day before, it's still completely full. And as she calls out for him, and we reach the end of the first issue, we see flies buzzing before we get the big reveal. Just behind the sofa lies a rotting, dead dog. Winston has been dead this whole time, not even 10 meters from them, as they've been going about their morning routine as usual. The couple are just refusing to acknowledge it because they're so conditioned to act calm and collected. It shows just how extreme this control is, to where even something as strong as grief has to be suppressed. And this moment is our first glimpse at just how great the use of colour is in this webtoon. You see, most of the comic has a very specific colour palette. It's very soft, warm colours, light pinks, light blues, a whole lot of light. Colours never too far from the middle of a colour wheel. And so when the palette does occasionally slip outside of these lighter colours and becomes more bold and intense, with black and blood red, the impact of these moments hits so much harder. It's as though all of that inner anger and pain that's been building up in these characters is finally breaking through. These moments of red are the brief moments of honesty, where the residents can no longer pretend that everything is fine. Although it's not just the use of colour that makes this moment so impactful, but also the fact that it is a webtoon. A cartoon designed specifically to be viewed on the web. In case you haven't read one, instead of flipping a page and reading left to right like you do with regular comic books, you read down. The whole comic is essentially one long strip of panels, because chances are you're either going to be reading it on your phone or on your computer, but either way, scrolling down. And I love this. As someone who's covered a fair amount of graphic novels on this channel, it is a little frustrating when you buy a graphic novel on, say, Kindle, and then you have to keep zooming in and out, trying to get the framing right so you can take in the whole image, all of the beautiful art, while also still being able to read the words. And don't get me wrong, this is absolutely a me problem. Almost all of these graphic novels were meant to be read with a physical copy, where all of this zooming in and out isn't an issue. But the truth is, sometimes I kinda like reading on my phone. I mean, I always have it with me, so say I'm on a spontaneous little stroll or yearning down the beach, and I got a bit of time to kill, I can just whip it out and have a nice time. I'm talking about books. And of course, I'm not saying that I prefer these webcomics to physical graphic novels. At the end of the day, it all comes down to which format best suits the story you're trying to tell, and what you're doing with your chosen format. And Everything is Fine really leans into the fact that it's a webtoon, with these long panels where you have to scroll down and down and down in order to reach the end.
Straight that shit, Johnny!
And this reveal of the dead dog is one of these moments. Given just how strange the couple are acting, and how we haven't seen the dog, or the fact that his bowl is still full from the day before, chances are the reader has a good idea about what's coming. But by making you scroll for it, it builds that tension in a much more gradual way, a way that I haven't really seen from other comics. It felt really unique, but perhaps the most unique aspect of this webcomic format is the music feature. There are several moments throughout the story where music is being played, say a character tuning into the radio, having a little boogie woogie. And while in a regular comic book, this music would stay on the page, only being heard by the characters themselves. Here in Everything is Fine, we get to hear this music too. It gets activated when you scroll past a certain panel. And this was such a welcome surprise, I wasn't sure at first where it was even coming from, but when I realised this was a built-in function, I was really impressed. This is something that you cannot do with physical media, which is what a good story should be aiming for, using the format to its full potential, whether it's a movie, a book, a graphic novel, or a webtoon. All of these have certain traits that make them unique, and Everything is Fine seems to really understand this. And the cool thing is, you can still buy a physical copy if you want to, with what's called Everything is Fine, a webtoon unscrolled. A version of the comic which has the exact same story, except a more traditional layout. And even though you do lose some of these traits with this version, I'd imagine it does a lot more to support the comic's creators, as the webtoon version is free to read, with the money I'm assuming coming from ads and subscriptions. Or you can just do what I did and get both. But back to the story, part 2 is where things start ramping up a bit, as we're introduced to the character of Charlie. One of Maggie and Sam's neighbours. And right from the get-go, Charlie feels very different from all the other residents, in that it never really feels like he's putting on a performance. Of course, he still wears the same happy cat mask that everyone else does, but he doesn't seem to care as much what people think of him. Instead of being overly friendly, Charlie isn't afraid to end a conversation early, or give people blunt one-word answers, or sigh loudly to show his frustration. And instead of dressing in that formal traditional clothing, Charlie rocks a hoodie because he understands the joys of being a snuggly little guy. But probably the best example of how Charlie differs from his neighbours can be found in how he returns home from the store. He zooms right in, making a screeching noise, slamming the car door shut before slamming his front door shut. Not the most considerable entrance. So it's clear that he's putting his own comfort above appearing a certain way, which makes Charlie everything that Maggie wants to be. Someone who isn't happy with their situation and isn't afraid to show it. And it's not long until Maggie starts to show similar behaviour, beginning with the way she dresses. While getting ready for a dinner party with all the lovely neighbours, Maggie tears up her more traditional formal dress for the bright red, flashier dress, the dress which stands out, an act which her neighbours clearly have an issue with, telling her that it gets cold in their house, and if she wants, they can get her a jacket to cover up. Once again, something which seems like a friendly gesture has this implication behind it. They don't really care if Maggie is cold or not, they just want her to conform in the same way that they are, scared to be seen with anyone even acting slightly different because of how it might reflect on them. Although it's not just the neighbours who have a problem with this dress, but also Maggie's own husband. Starting off with a harsher comment, how it's too much for a dinner party, but making sure to follow it up with a more harmless comment, how the dress doesn't match his tie. To which Maggie responds, then get a new tie. So it's clear that she's no longer going to change the way she looks to fit in with everyone else. And if they have an issue with it, it's up to them to change the way they think. And this doesn't just go for wearing what she wants, Maggie also begins to say what she wants.
And we can say whatever the hell we want.
When at the dinner party, there's a moment where the neighbours ask how their dog is doing. So Sam starts coming up with what is likely going to be some excuse or happy anecdote about where he's gone off to, pretending that he's fine, when Maggie just comes right out and says that he's dead. No positive spin or dressing it up in a metaphor, just blunt honesty. The same kind found in all of Charlie's interactions. These two are starting to have a lot in common, and so while at this dinner party, while everyone else is laughing away hysterically at a joke which isn't even that funny, trying desperately to prove they're having a good time, Maggie and Charlie stay silent before locking eyes and exchanging a simple hey. It's this moment of recognition between two people who are clearly fed up of their situation, and it shows just how conditioned everyone is here, to where simply not laughing along to a joke is enough for these two to believe they can trust each other. That's all it takes. As after this moment, Charlie decides it's time to get Maggie alone for a conversation, so he waits till she's gone to the doo-doo room, aka toilet, before ambushing her. Of course, you can never be too careful, so he doesn't say anything outright incriminating. All he asks is if Maggie would like to come over to his sometime and look at his model trains. Sure bud, we've all heard that one before. However, what the pair don't realise is that during this conversation, they're being watched through a peephole hidden on a piece of art hanging on the wall. The neighbours were already suspicious of Charlie given just how different he acts, but now they're certain he's up to something. So they decide to use this information to their advantage, calling the higher-ups to tell them all about this secret meeting. And the next day, after her hubby leaves for work, Maggie heads over to Charlie's, who, after greeting her, begins to lead Maggie to his basement. But it's clear that whatever he's about to show her, it isn't model trains, as before they head down, Charlie gives Maggie a warning that after she enters, she may be confused and want to run away, but to trust him. However, before they can head down, they're interrupted by someone at the door, and we're introduced to the character of Tom, one of the local police officers. Tipped off by the neighbours, he's come to investigate. And what's interesting about Officer Tom is that despite having more power and authority than everyone else, he still has to play by the same rules. He still has to wear the Hello Kitty mask, he still has that overly friendly demeanour, except this time there's a much more threatening undertone to everything he says, as though he knows how much power he holds, and he isn't afraid to lord it over the other residents. There's a really simple but effective technique they use when it comes to Officer Tom. Of course, with everyone's face covered by a smile, it's harder to make a character come across as intimidating. So what they do is, when someone is making a threat, they zoom in real close and have their mask be covered in shadow. It's a subtle change that in any other comic you probably wouldn't even notice. But when your whole comic has this bright, warm aesthetic, even a tiny bit of shadow is enough to make a big difference. To make a character feel dangerous. And Officer Tom is dangerous, as we soon see the consequences of not falling in line. Why everyone is so scared of acting different. When after telling Maggie that she can't leave, Officer Tom switches his attention over to Charlie, interrogating him over what's in the basement. He tries playing it off at first, but quickly realises there's no way out of this. The jig is up, and all he can do now is try and save Maggie, who really, at this moment, is still technically innocent. She has no idea what's in the basement. She's becoming defiant, yes, but she still hasn't crossed that line. So Officer Tom decides to use this moment as a lesson, a warning of what will happen if she continues down Charlie's path. He enters the basement, finds what he suspects was down there, before coming back up and dishing out Charlie's punishment, finding him guilty of conspiracy to undermine the optimal functions of society, a crime which sounds incredibly vague. I mean, what are the optimal functions of society? And who decides them? It sounds like the kind of thing which most people would have a very different opinion about. What is the best way to run a society? As annoying as it is, there isn't really one correct answer to this question. And so it's clear that this law is just a thinly masked weapon to be used by the state to punish anyone who doesn't agree with them, making it illegal to be opposition by dressing it up in fancy language. The punishment for this charge is referred to as red status, which seems to be a form of psychological torture. Red status can be activated by a simple push of a button on an officer's phone, for any resident at any time. There's no trial or judges to go through, it's all down to what officer happens to arrest you on that particular day, which as we soon see is far too much power for anyone to just be walking around with. There's several elements to this punishment, but the first is exile. Once you've been designated red status, you're no longer able to communicate with any of the residents. Officer Tom telling Charlie that he is to vacate his home and that he may not speak or interact with any residents. However, this isn't just a burden on the offender, but also a burden on regular innocent residents. As even if you've done nothing wrong and you simply talk to someone with red status, you too are given red status. And we see this in effect, as now that Charlie's been marked, any time that he gets brought up, everyone pretends they don't know who he is, despite only recently having dinner with him. Officer Tom even approaches Maggie at the park just to test her, asking about Charlie to see if she'll acknowledge him. So with red status, you're essentially erased. It's such a fitting punishment for the state to inflict. Just another thing which everyone has to lie about. Even when every single resident knows the truth, even when the state knows the truth, knows that this person existed, they still try and sweep it under the rug. However, this exile is far from the worst part of red status, because as soon as it's activated, Charlie's eyes turn red, and he begins screaming in pain. But this screaming isn't due to physical pain, but actually emotional pain, because of something he's being shown. You see, this isn't the first time that a resident's eyes have turned red, it happens several times throughout the comic, except normally it's only one eye that turns red, and it always seems to be at a time when a resident is about to act up, doing something that the state would disapprove of. Like say, when Charlie is returning from the grocery store and the neighbours won't stop questioning him over what's in his basement. It looks like it might escalate, but then suddenly, all of them, Maggie, Charlie, the neighbours, they all have one red eye and they all stop talking. So could it be that in this moment they're all reminded of something? Something which, due to the eye being red, we know is likely painful, the kind of thing they're supposed to forget. And not only this, but right before red status is activated on Charlie, he tells Officer Tom her name is Charlotte. And then the second it's activated, he yells out, "Honey, no." So he's clearly addressing someone here. This isn't the kind of thing someone says when they're in physical pain. It's the kind of thing they say when someone they care about is in physical pain. Say a wife, or a daughter. And then later on, Maggie finds a drawing that shows Charlie holding hands with a young girl, and this drawing is labelled Charlotte. So all of this points towards the state holding Charlie's child hostage, ready to be punished at a moment's notice, maybe even killed, and then having this be shown to Charlie if he ever steps out of line. And suddenly, everyone acting so friendly, stopping themselves from getting into fights or trouble, going along with these obvious lies, makes a lot more sense. You begin to look back through the comic and realise, wait a minute, where are the children? This is supposed to be a utopia, but we're 10 parts in and haven't seen a single one. I mean, a pretty popular reason to move to the suburbs is to raise kids, or to win a bet against Frank Reynolds.
These are city scum. They can't hack it out here.
And this is supposedly the most idyllic suburb of them all, and yet no kids. Because they've all been taken to be used as leverage. Not just Charlie's, but Maggie's and Sam's, the snaky neighbours. All of them have this threat hanging over them at all times. The comic doesn't actually confirm that Maggie and Sam have a child till later on, but they do a good job at foreshadowing it with some visual clues. Like how Maggie constantly sees free of everything. Free swings, free flowers, free toothbrushes, when in reality, there's often only two there. So we know, to Maggie, something is missing, with this third object always positioned right in the middle, the same kind of position where a child would be found in a family portrait. And when it comes to these toothbrushes, we know which one belongs to who thanks to the clever use of colour association, in which every lead character is assigned their own unique colour for everything. Their masks, their clothes, even their speech bubbles, with pink for Maggie and blue for Sam. But this middle brush, the brush which isn't really there, is red, the colour of something forgotten, a painful memory. And this might not seem like a lot, but in a story like this, where the truth is rarely ever said, I think it's important to lean on all of these other elements, like colour association, to let the reader in on what's really happening. You can't ever fully trust what the characters are saying, so instead just look at the colours and lighting and they'll tell you all you need to know. But back to the snaky neighbours, if they're all in the same boat, they've all had their children taken, then why did they sell out Maggie and Charlie? What is their reward for proving just how loyal they are to the state? Well, that would be a one-way ticket to Lakeview. We first learn of Lakeview at the dinner party with all of the neighbours, and when it's mentioned, Sam asks, "That's up, right?" Which the neighbours spin into him asking whether it's up north. But of course, what Sam is really saying here is that Lakeview is above them, not only in terms of geographical location, but class too. Lakeview is a reward, only reserved for the most devoted and loyal citizens of these suburbs. The ones who are willing to do anything for those in charge, including selling out their own neighbours. But they won't admit that Lakeview is a better place, because if there is a better place out there, then it implies that where they're at now isn't perfect, and that couldn't possibly be the case. But the real reward of Lakeview could be that it's one step closer to getting your children back. Maybe if you keep proving yourself, keep going up and up through all these different towns, at the end of it all, your children are returned to you. I mean, this would be the ultimate motivation to get the neighbours to snitch on one another. The next episode picks up a couple of weeks later, where after the events that took place at Charlie's, Maggie is doing worse than we've ever seen her, too defeated to even get out of bed. And while going about her day, we see that she's trying her best to forget everything. A child, all of this pretending, what happened to Charlie, yelling forget at herself over and over again. But it doesn't seem to be working. Her pain is becoming overwhelming. After all, even though she hasn't seen what's in Charlie's basement, the second she decided to head over to his house that day, she decided she'd had enough. And a small part of her probably hoped that whatever he had to show her would provide a way out, or at the very least, something to give her purpose, so she can't go back to living how she was. The cat's out the bag now, and it's only a matter of time until she decides to go back and try and get the answers she came for that day. And so she walks out her door, enters his home, and decides to go down into his basement. But at first, it seems normal, just your average basement. If there was something down here, then the state have gotten rid of it. But whoever cleaned up this crime scene didn't do a very good job, because hiding behind a washing machine is a piece of foil stuck to the wall. And when Maggie investigates further, she discovers a box with a book hidden inside it. A book titled Science 101. And it's through this book that Maggie learns what the foil was for. A Faraday cage. A Faraday cage is where you cover something in a conductive material, say foil, and if fully enclosed, it will block out any electromagnetic fields. Charlie had covered his entire basement in foil so that he could have a place where the state can't reach him, where they can't listen in or track him. And as you might imagine with how controlling the state is, this is a big no-no. There is no greater defiance of a surveillance state than taking away their surveillance. This was Charlie's great crime, and now that we know what he was hiding, it finally explains the words he spoke to Maggie that day. Why he said she might be scared and want to run. Because she's been so conditioned into thinking her own thoughts, her natural thoughts, are a bad thing that need to be pushed down and repressed, and that having somewhere where these thoughts can be let out without fear or consequence is unforgivable. The state view a place like this, where their eyes don't reach, as a place for plotting and scheming. I mean, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, right? And yes, if plotting and scheming is going to happen anywhere, it will be somewhere like this, somewhere hidden. But there's a chance that for many people, this Faraday cage is built without an end in sight. But they didn't build it to be part of some grand conspiracy to overthrow the state or cause harm. They just want a bit of privacy, one place they can call their own, where they don't have to act a certain way. Their intentions could very well be harmless, and it's only after spending some time in this place, and they begin to feel more free and comfortable in their own thoughts, that the idea of going against the state begins to creep into their heads. Because now they've seen how good it feels to be away from them, they want to make it a permanent thing. They want to expand this Faraday cage out into the world. But it all starts with one room, and so Maggie decides she's going to build her own Faraday cage, and to do that she's going to need a whole lot of foil. But what do you know, the store is all out of the stuff. But luckily, a mysterious woman outside the store has all the foil she needs. All she asks in return is that when the time comes, Maggie will owe her something. So, with her foil at the ready, Maggie starts to build her Faraday cage. However, her neighbours, the same ones who ratted out Charlie, spot her bringing in the foil and decide they're going to make a call. And this is what separates these neighbours from Charlie and Sam. You could argue that, at first, they're just doing what's best for themselves. They too have lost a daughter, and if selling out Charlie helps them get her back, then so be it. You might not agree with it, but it is understandable. However, in this case, they've already showed how loyal they are to the state. They're already being rewarded with their big move to Lakeside, which is just around the corner. The only reason they're now deciding to rat out Maggie is spite. It's what makes you root for Maggie, but hate the neighbours. neighbours, because they're all in the same horrible situation, they're all victims, but the neighbours actively go out of their way to tear others down, like with the comment made about Maggie's dress. And the same goes for Officer Tom, as we later find out that he too has had his children taken away. He probably had no choice in becoming an officer, but he doesn't just do his duty, he goes above and beyond for the state. He didn't have to go and test Maggie, pestering her in the park. He didn't have to force her to watch what happened to Charlie. He did these things because he enjoys the power that he holds over the others. I mean, yeah, a lot of the time, he's giving out the standard orders which most enforcers probably do, but there's something he does every time he introduces himself that I think says a lot about his character. Whenever someone addresses him as Officer Tom, he insists that they call him just Tom, which very well could be a harmless, friendly gesture, but from everything we know about Tom, he is neither harmless nor friendly. So to me, this insisting he be called Tom seems to be just another command that he likes to throw in for the sake of it, opening every interaction up with reminding them that he is in charge. And Maggie calls him out on this, telling him, even through that mask, I saw it on your face. We may all be in the same boat here, but that doesn't mean we have to enjoy it like you do. And it's not long until Officer Tom gets what's coming to him, as while finishing up her Faraday cage, Maggie is trying to stop Sam from heading into the basement, when all of a sudden, someone arrives at the door. And what do you know, it's Officer Tom coming to investigate the neighbour's tip. And Sam, completely unaware of what's below them, offers Tom the grand tour, leading him right down into the basement. And as soon as the lights flick on, it's revealed the room is covered from floor to ceiling in foil. The pair don't goofed up, but as Officer Tom begins reading out the charges the pair will be receiving, he turns to see Maggie stood at the top of the stairs, holding a hammer. You see, Officer Tom's biggest mistake was showing Maggie exactly what would happen to her if she steps out of line. She saw what happened when Charlie was caught, he begged and pleaded, and it got him nowhere. So why would Maggie even consider doing the same? She knows now that there is only one way out of this situation, to kill Officer Tom, which she does, bringing the hammer down on his head, beating him over and over. Now, naturally, Sam is very shocked by all this. Less than a minute ago, his life was pretty ordinary. Well, as ordinary as it can be in a world like this. But it was just a regular day for him, and now his entire worldview has been shaken. And so, for the next part, rather than opening from Maggie's perspective like usual, instead, we open from Sam's perspective. We see how he's reacting to all this, which is not too well. We get several POV panels where everything is blurred as Sam shuts down and disassociates. Prior to this, we don't really know anything about Sam's personality, because all we ever see him do is parrot the state's message. He still has that mask of everything is fine. But this moment where it shifts to his perspective is really the beginning of Sam feeling like a main character, on the same level as Maggie. And honestly, going forward, their dynamic was one of my favourite parts of the story. We've seen just how isolated Maggie is, how isolated all of the residents are. I mean, sure, she sees her husband every day, wakes up next to him, but when he's always putting on a performance, is it even still her husband? When the real him only exists inside of his own head? But now that the pair are down in the Faraday cage together, they can finally communicate, and we get some much needed honesty in a story which, up until this point, has had none. The couple talk through their issues, and we learn that Sam feels the same way as Maggie. He also hates the state and having to put on this performance. He's just convinced himself that it's the best way to get their child back, which, given everything we know, is pretty understandable. And the second Maggie hears all this, hears the truth, their relationship gets stronger. It just proves that it really has been the state keeping them apart this whole time. And now they're on the same page, we get one of my favourite moments from the whole comic. When, for the first time in a while, the pair have a little cuddle. They whip out the old big spoon, lil spoon. And for once, this warm, cozy aesthetic doesn't feel fake. You get the idea that their expressions match that of their masks. But what I enjoyed most about this moment is actually the framing. It's made up of 3 panels, where it starts out wide with a full view of the bed, before it zooms in on their torsos, but you can still see a small piece of Maggie's mask, before finally all we see is their legs as they press against each other, with no masks in sight. This could be a panel from any old comic book, and it's as though for a brief moment everything really really is fine. There's no stay or cameras or pretending, just this sweet, honest moment. Even if it is short-lived, because there's no time for spooning when an officer's lying dead in the basement. This issue isn't just going to go away by itself, and so Maggie and Sam come up with a sneaky plan to pin the blame for Tom's murder on their neighbours, the same ones who sold them out. It's a little complicated, so put your concentration beanie on and bear with me.
This is what I call Operation Cannot Possibly Fail. Neato!
Now, you may have noticed that Officer Tom has a stylish stash above his upper lip. Well, this stash isn't a real stash. And not only this, but Officer Tom and Sam happen to have the same colour mask, light blue. And so a thought pops into Maggie's head. Sam has everything he needs to impersonate Officer Tom, except for his voice. However, thankfully, they find a video on Tom's phone of him playing with his children before they were taken. And using this video, they managed to stitch together several words into a couple sentences. Just basic ones, enough to make it through a short conversation. So, with his Officer Tom disguise at the ready, Sam heads over to the neighbours. Now, because the neighbours believe that Sam is really Officer Tom, they let him into their home without any hesitation, and right down into their basement. And while down there, Sam plants evidence, the tracker implanted into Tom's mask and Tom's phone. But there's still one problem, and that's the cameras which line the street. If they see Officer Tom leaving the neighbour's home, then how could they have killed him? So while Sam is round the back of the neighbour's house, Maggie knocks on their door and distracts the husband so that Sam can jump the fence and avoid the cameras. So now, when the state check the cameras, it will look like Officer Tom entered the neighbour's home and never left. But there's still one loose end, and that's the body, which is still laying in Maggie and Sam's basement. So once night falls, they carry it up the stairs, over the back fence, and down into the neighbour's basement. And now all they need to do is place a call and leave a tip. And not long after, the police come and they find the body. And what I like about this whole plan and the plotting and the scheming is that there are multiple opportunities for the neighbours to prevent their fate. From the very beginning when they ratted Maggie out when they didn't have to, but also they're not idiots. They realise very quickly what Maggie and Sam have done to Officer Tom. Or at least the husband does. The wife on the other hand is sceptical, and lays into the husband for even suggesting this. But had she just heard her husband out and entertained the idea, then they might have had a chance to counter Maggie and Sam's moves, find the evidence they planted and throw it back onto them. But there doesn't seem to be any trust in their relationship, and that's why Maggie and Sam win and the neighbours lose. There's a moment while down in the Faraday cage where Maggie tells Sam it's who we are when we're in here that counts. And she's right. As soon as Maggie and Sam have somewhere they can talk openly, they immediately resolve their issues by listening to one another. It feels like a safe space, free of judgment. But when we see the neighbours in their Faraday cage, a closet they've converted, the wife constantly shuts the husband down. It's supposed to be the one place they can talk freely, and yet he's repeatedly silenced. And in that way, she isn't entirely different from the state. But regardless of her actions, what happens next is still very tragic, as the couple are given their punishment for the murder of Officer Tom. And what is this punishment, you may ask? Well, of course, that would be red status, which says so much about the state, to where having a secret room is on the same level as taking a life. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if red status is the only punishment there is, no matter how big or small the crime. Looking back at the law that Charlie broke, undermining the optimal functions of society, it's so vague that you could argue almost any crime falls under this umbrella. So don't you even think about jaywalking, Miss Maggie, as we're about to finally see just how brutal red status is. As we zoom into the neighbour's red eyes and see two children standing on the roof of a tall building. And from what the children say, it's clear that they are aware that their parents are watching them in this moment, telling them that they'll be brave and they love them before stepping over the edge and falling to their deaths. It made me step back for a moment and reminded me who the real villain of this story is. Because the neighbours are the immediate threat, and the state are sort of this entire system, a system which doesn't really have a face to it, it's really easy to put all of this hatred onto the neighbours. And don't get me wrong, they're not good people, but it's hard to know what they're truly like. If their children hadn't have been taken, would they still be so spiteful? They are villains, yes, but they're also victims, just like Maggie and Sam. This moment should feel rewarding. Our lead characters won. Their plan worked. But seeing the neighbours weep on the floor, it reminds you that under the control of the state, no one really wins. All Maggie and Sam have done here is keep themselves alive for another day, and kept their children alive for another day. And it is tragic that in this world, that's even considered a win, and not just a normal occurrence. Although there is one good thing to come out of all of this, and that's that there's a chance that Maggie and Sam are now one step closer to getting their child back. As seeing as the neighbours are now red status, this means that there's an open spot at Lakeview, which the officer decides to give to Maggie and Sam. I mean, they called in the tip. As far as he's concerned, they're loyal, good citizens. And right after they leave, he tells them just how lucky they are, as had they stayed in that house any longer, both Maggie and Sam would be burned alive. You see, one by one, all of the neighbourhoods are being torched, and as part 27 comes to an end, we scroll down and see rows and rows of burned down houses. So why are the state doing this? Why burn down all the residences? Well, they probably explain this in a later issue, but there's something which Sam says earlier on that I think gives us a good clue. When grabbing Maggie a coffee, Sam calls it caffeine, and the pair talk about how they can't even remember the last time they had real coffee, implying that whatever it is they're drinking must be some kind of substitute, probably because it's cheaper and goes further. So there's a chance that the state are struggling to feed their citizens. There aren't enough resources to go around, and so they've resorted to culling the population, one neighbourhood at a time. This way, there's more available for those who are left. Maybe more for those who live in Lakeview. And it's not long until we get to see the place, as the first issue ends with Maggie and Sam's arrival. And at first glance, Lakeview seems great. It certainly has a lot more personality than the residences they came from. I mean, even just the fact it has a name, and not just digits and numbers, is enough to make it more memorable. And rather than endless identical squares with endless identical homes, here in Lakeview, each building is different. There's trees everywhere, mountains. It feels much less artificial, not just in the surroundings, but the people too. The residents of Lakeview have small customizations on their masks, say a butterfly, a heart, whatever the hell this is. Math people, what shape is this? It's a subtle difference, but it shows how the residents of Lakeview have more free will. Or do they? Looking at all of these improvements, customizations on the masks, unique homes, it's all still artificial. It's still just surface level stuff. Lakeview may seem great at first glance, but so did the suburbs, where the issues were never how it appeared. The issues were what was lying under the surface. The rules, the way people act, the surveillance, the things you don't see. And so it's clear that Maggie and Sam are still a long way from freedom. They've just moved from one prison to a fancier one. But who knows, maybe I'm wrong and everything really is fine. I guess we'll have to wait and see. I would love to cover the next installment, but if I'm being honest, it does kind of depend on how this video does, just because of how long they take. So if you want to see me cover part 2, like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz, it really does help, and we're creeping up on that silver play button, which is insane. Now, if you've made it to this part of the video, you may be thinking, a story about a dystopian world where you're expected to act a certain way, and everyone is spying on one another, and there's a harsh government waiting to punish you at any given moment, who will do anything but admit they're wrong. This sounds a little familiar. It sounds a little like 1984. And I doubt you'd be alone in thinking this. One of the first things I thought was, oh, it's like 1984 meets Hello Kitty. But while there definitely are similarities to 1984, not Hello Kitty, I do think that Everything is Fine does more than enough to make itself stand on its own. 1984 was written in 1949, I know, clickbait, and follows a society where there's a screen in every room that watches you, cameras everywhere. But despite being more than 70 years old, it is still the book when it comes to tackling issues of surveillance and government control, because of just how well George Orwell predicted the direction that society was heading. But what this means is that whenever something comes along that also tackles these issues, it's easy to compare the two. But again, even though they have similar concepts, once you look deeper than this, they are very different, even in just their format. 1984 is a novel, told from one man's perspective, and so it feels like the whole story is really just his stream of consciousness. It's bitter, it's bleak, and you feel it from the first paragraph. It never tries to hide the fact that the world is horrible, whereas Everything is Fine keeps things more vague. Because it's a comic, and because there's no speech bubbles, no because there's no thought bubbles, sorry. We never know what Maggie's thinking, we aren't inside her head, and so it leaves things a bit more open to interpretation. Of course, we quickly find out that the world is in fact bleak and bitter, but it's almost always presented as colourful and great. We're seeing the world as the state wants it to be seen. This is just one of many differences, but it's enough to make it its own thing. Honestly, is it really all that surprising that so many stories feel like they're inspired by 1984, when even life itself seems to be inspired by 1984? What I'm trying to say here is that sometimes a piece of art comes along and hits the nail on the head so well that its shadow will be felt for years to come, and anything even remotely similar will always be compared to it. So if you have read 1984, I'd still absolutely recommend going and checking this webtoon out. It's really something special. I've left links in the description to the webtoon and the physical copies, so you can check the story out either one of those. But until next time.